After the route has been entered into the MCDU, the second portion of our before start to the line flow is to complete the performance initialization. Notice the prompt to the bottom right will lead me to Perf Init page 1 of 3. On this page, we'll have to fill out climb, cruise, and descent profiles. Today, on the Chicago 8, we're restricted to 250 knots until otherwise advised. So I'll put 250 to Mach 7.4 under my climb profile. For cruise, notice the release has us filed at econ or cost index. So I'm just going to use 290 knots to Mach 7.8, which will match my descent profile, which is found in the SOPM. The standard descent profile is 290 to Mach 7.8 to 3 degrees. Before I move on, I have to first select Departure Approach Speed Prompt, which will take me to the Departure Speed page. On this page, I can change my speed limit to either 200 knots or 250. Today I'm going to use 200 knots on the Chicago 8 because per the departure, we have to cross 5 miles from the VOR at 3,000 feet. So under the limit portion, I'm going to change 2,500 AGL to 3,000 and also modify 4 miles to 5. You can change this departure silo to anything you want. Today this will help us cross 5 miles at 3,000 feet. The next page, I find my approach speeds, and I'll have to program these every flight. We'll use 210 knots for clean speeds. Flaps 2 will be 180 and 150 knots for flaps 3. I'll use these speeds every time, and we get these speeds from the performance section of the QRH, 30-6. Under the limit, we have a choice of slowing at the first approach waypoint, yes or no. I'm going to select no because I don't want the airplane slowing outside of 15 miles and 3,000 feet from the airport. As you can see, we can change that limit if we want to, but today I'll leave it as is. The next step is to go around speeds, which is found on page 3 of 3. Same speeds here. For flaps up, we'll use 210. Flaps 2, I'll enter 180 like I did on the previous page, but notice when I do that, it autofills flaps 1 6 knots higher. And finally 150 for flaps 3. Notice the return prompt at the top right of the page. If I select that, it brings me back to Perf Init page 1 of 3. We've already selected these speeds, so I can move on to the next page. And notice off the release, my fuel reserve is 2,446, so I'll put that in the fuel reserve field. For taxi out and taxi in fuel, I just select my taxi out fuel of 324 and leave the taxi in fuel blank. No need for contingency fuel because we do not have hold fuel listed on the release. And finally, the last page is 3 of 3. I'm going to verify my transition altitude is 18,000 feet. For initial cruise altitude, I'll use the filed cruise altitude off the flight release of flight level 280. And I can bring that same altitude into the scratch pad and put it in the cruise winds at altitude. Our cruise winds today happen to be 290 at 79 knots. Once that's complete, I'll verify top right that the speed altitude limit's 250 knots at 10,000 feet. And finally, my ISO deviation for cruise today is -3 degrees. Once this entire page is complete, with the exception of the zero fuel weight, it is time to move on in my before start to the line flow.